All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. We're excited to start our Manufacturing Leader Roundtable discussion. My name is Robin Klaterbach, and I'm the Senior Director of Marketing with Interrel. And I am joined today by Taylor Martin, who is one of our very experienced regional sales directors, and we will be together moderating the panel discussion. So now I want to introduce our panelists. First, we have Paul Ward, who is the Manager of Finance Systems for Timken Steel. We just heard his planning and migration case study in the previous session, so great to have you back, Paul. Next, I want to introduce Mike Bosco, who is the Manager of Financial Applications for Arconic. Then I want to introduce Kristen Fisher, who's the Director of FP&A for Oshkosh. And finally, I want to introduce Antonella Soreo, who recently featured in an Oracle blog article, and she is the Vice President of Financing and the Corporate Controller for Knoll. So we regret that John Bender, who's Senior Manager of Finance Projects with Eaton, had a last-minute scheduling conflict and couldn't join us today. But time permitting, at the end of this discussion, we will share some additional insights from Eaton. So a couple of quick housekeeping items. We are going to be leaving time for Q&A at the end of the discussion, but feel free to submit any specific questions you have in the chat box at the bottom of your screen throughout the conversation, and we'll address them at the end. So let's get started. To kind of lay the groundwork, many businesses have encountered significant disruption during the pandemic. But manufacturers especially are feeling the direct impact of production, supply chain, operational viability. So I want to start with Paul. What trends have you seen in the industry as a result of the pandemic?
Okay, so thank you. Yeah, one thing I just wanted to apologize for my logo being reversed on.
It's actually not reversed. I think it only looks reversed from your lens, but we see.
Oh, okay. All right, thanks. Yeah, so the manufacturing trends. So employee safety has always been a big focus in manufacturing, especially at Timken Steel. Everybody in our manufacturing environments wearing safety equipment, from safety glasses all the way up to silver flame retardant suits. So COVID saw the new piece of PPE and lockers of all of our employees. We've been following the infection disease control guidelines and looking at workspaces and procedures. The remote work for most of our salaried workforce has been going very smoothly. I've been home since March 1st, and it looks like I'm going to be here for a few more months. So we've had to make decisions quickly, and I think most of the manufacturing industries also had to make decisions quickly to react to changes in the supply chain and customer demand and things like that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. That's a great point. So to that end, Kristen, let me ask you, what business processes have you had to adjust, and how, based on the impact of COVID?
Oshkosh overall has seen a lot of disruption with COVID, notably on the manufacturing side with supplier chain, as well as just shutdowns for COVID-related absenteeism. So I would say across the planning side and finance, we've adjusted all of our processes accordingly. Our long-range model was in process when COVID hit, and we ended up doing multiple scenarios this year on that, mostly just with the lack of information of when a recovery would actually happen in the economy. So we spent a lot of time doing a lot more robust long-range modeling this year, and that bridged into our budgeting timeline too. So we've spent a lot more time budgeting lots of different scenarios. I think that's kind of echoed across a lot of the manufacturing companies this year. And then just interesting enough, we've really just changed the way we looked at our targets for this year as well. When we set those early in the year, we're a fiscal year end, so we might be maybe a quarter ahead of everybody in their year cycle. So we're already 3 months in, almost 4 months through our fiscal year, and setting our targets and looking back at all of that, and lots of analytics regarding what was the impact for COVID, and spending a lot of time trying to aggregate those impacts both on a lost manufacturing sales side as well as what were our savings offsets. So a lot of time spent enacting savings plans for it too.
Right. No, that makes sense. Yeah, budgeting and forecasting definitely impacted by COVID. So let me ask you, Antonella, what has the impact been on your ability to plan and forecast for 2021 at Knoll?
So COVID had a very significant impact on our ability to plan and forecast, mainly due to the various closures, reopenings, and city mandates. When COVID first came into effect in March, we scrambled to start reforecasting the year. At the time, we were still in the process of implementing Oracle FCC, so we really had very little automation. It seemed like our projections were changing daily and sometimes multiple times a day. From the beginning of March to about late April, where we had our first board meeting post-COVID, we had gotten up to about our 80th plus model. Given the lack of automation at the time, we were trying to build Excel models. However, given the quick turnaround needed, we were not able to build out fully functional models. And that really hampered our ability to update real time, was really difficult when we were in meetings and our company executives were asking for real time information. From there, given the economic landscape, we ended up pushing back our planning process. We generally start our plan in July, and we ended up pushing it back to about September start time. The good thing about that was once we got to September, we had Oracle FCC in place. So this made a huge difference. Even though we only had the consolidations model, we had the foresight to build in different scenarios. So we have an actual scenario, we have a recast scenario, we have forecast, and we have budget. So given the fact that we had the forecast and budget, we were able to really build out templates, link them to our smart views, and then start basically loading the budget into FCC and building those retreats. We were able to real time update our models and quickly turn around new models. But I think if I look from March to December, I think the last count I had with a long range plan, we were probably at 132 was our last count. And I really don't think it's going to change with 21 because we're still kind of riding out the landscape. When are the reopenings going to happen? There's new shutdowns. There's the new variant. Now Europe's shutting down. So I do think this is not going away anytime soon. And I think anyone in the FP&A function really realizes that you're gonna end up modeling and remodeling quite a bit.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. That's one of the things Interrel really evangelized over the past year is the importance of scenario planning and strategic modeling. So you guys were definitely ahead of it. So let me ask you this, Paul. You mentioned supply chains earlier. How have your supply chains and customers been impacted? And are you still feeling the hit? As Antonella said, we're still kind of in the midst of it. So are you still feeling the impact of it all?
Well, yes and no. Early on, the supply chain disruptions for materials and services wasn't that difficult on the supply end. We were able to manage and maintain operations. We've never had to shut down due to employee illness, pandemic breakouts, or anything like that, or lack of supplies. We did see a lot of impact on the customer side. So particularly like the automotive industry shut down big assembly lines. So the supply chain for a large percentage of our business was closed in April, May, into June a little bit. So that's recovered. They're still ramping up based on just tentative markets across all the industries that everybody's facing. But we've been continuing to operate uninterrupted, and we're planning to continue to ramp up in the next year.
That's great. That's great news. So I have a question for you, Mike. You're a little bit magenta, blending into your background. It's a nice look on you. How did the tumultuous time drive you toward EPM Cloud sooner than expected?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Robin. So let me just start by saying that the timing of the pandemic and corresponding economic downturn was particularly challenging for Arconic. Just as the seriousness of COVID-19 was
Did he freeze? You're kind of going in and out.
Yeah, we have some connection issues, Mike.
All right, Mike seems like he's got some Wi-Fi issues.
Arconic, that financial plans had to, sufficiently forecast the financials of each company as is required, to receive regulatory approval for such a company separation. But now we were, about to launch, not knowing just what the global economic impact of COVID would be. Now, yes, we have been long time Hyperion using HFM for closed consolidation, as well as planning an S-base for our annual plans, our monthly forecasting and analytical reporting. However, competing business priorities over the prior 5 years had really prevented us from committing the resources to upgrade to the Oracle EPM Cloud. Though we've gotten a lot out of our initial Hyperion investment and our subsequent incremental improvements, our on-premise version 11 solution was really not as capable as we would have liked last year. Most notably, and as Antonella has already mentioned, scenario planning in our current system, though possible, is certainly not as nimble as we would like it to be. Our board, our directors, wanted to know the obvious questions, right? How would our known business drivers be impacted? Would new business drivers be introduced, and what would their criticality be? What is the range of plausible scenarios, and what would be the implication of each? And then what could be expected if there was a combination of plausible scenarios that were realized? So these answers were provided by our finance and FP&A team, but it was definitely more labor intensive than we believe it would have been if we had already modernized our solution to take advantage of the capability of the EPM Cloud. And let's just say by the summer of last year, our business case for step change process improvements, along with a technology upgrade to the EPM Cloud, was forming with momentum.
That's great. And hopefully that means you'll be in better shape entering 2021 for managing everything. So that's good. So Antonella.
Well, Taylor promised us we would. So.
Well, Taylor knows her stuff. So that. All right, Antonella, quick question for you. What permanent effects do you feel the pandemic's impact has had on the way you do business moving forward?
So the pandemic definitely has significant impact on us. Working at Knoll, whoever's not familiar with Knoll, we are about 60% of our business is a workplace furniture manufacture and sales distribution, and we feel that the pandemic will have significant impacts. The workplace is shifting, and the future of the workplace is expected to be significantly different. Changes will likely occur from having individuals working in the office every day to having flexible schedules and permanent work from home. Offices are anticipated to become we spaces instead of me spaces. And what is meant by that is we're anticipating office to become more locations where individuals go to have meetings or collaborate on projects, and not necessarily a place where individuals will go simply to get their daily tasks done. With the pandemic, we really have shifted our focus from opening showrooms and physical locations and physical spaces to sell our furniture to working on building out our e-commerce capabilities. We're also heavily focused on the residential side of our business, which is about 40% of our revenue makeup, and working on capitalizing on the increased demand in that sector, as residential spending has significantly increased over the past year, with individuals taking funds that they would previously have used to travel or commute from work, or even discretionary spending that they would have spent to go out and have a good time. Now they've really shifted that spend to increase spending on residential improvements and furniture. So we're really seeing an uptick in the residential market. So really, in summary, I think the pandemic really changed our go-to-market strategy, because we weren't heavily focused on the e-commerce side. We had it in back of mind. We had done an acquisition, a very timely acquisition in August of 19. That's an e-commerce platform that sells work from home furniture. But then we started to really understand that we need to build out the e-commerce platform for the rest of our business. And then also shifting our focus, where I said we used to be 60% workplace, but we're really now looking at our residential side and determining how do we build that up.
Yeah, it sounds like Knoll did a great job pivoting quickly in response to everything that was happening. So that's pretty impressive. And it's good that you had that acquisition where you had kind of some infrastructure in place where you were able to do that pivot relatively quickly. So good job for you. All right, Paul, one final COVID question. Overall, how have you been dealing with the economic impact of the pandemic? Has it affected? I mean, we've talked a little bit about the effects, but from an economy perspective, how have you been dealing with it?
Overall, personally, I've been dealing with it pretty well. Like I said, I've been home for 10 months. Some of these IT people are used to working from home all the time. I've adjusted with it. My team's adjusted with it. Our whole company has adjusted with the pandemic without too much issue. Like I said, we went 6 months without a single COVID case. They're tracking it on a weekly basis with a focused team within the company. I think it's been manageable. Yes.
Yeah, that's great. That's great news. Okay, so now we're going to move away from the pandemic impact, which is all very interesting, but a little, depressing. And I just want to ask a few general EPM centric questions. So Mike, I'm going to start with you. What was your team's biggest driver in selecting Oracle EPM Cloud versus the other software platforms in the marketplace? So we talked a little bit about, adopting it, but why did you choose Oracle EPM versus other software platforms?
Yeah, that's a popular question. And to answer it for us, I have to take a little bit of a step back. But first of all, let me just say there was a few main factors. The first is we are an Oracle shop. We have other ERPs in the business units, but Oracle is our main ERP at corporate. And we just felt there would be financial and technological advantages immediately and for a long time to come, even if we couldn't identify up front what all of those would be. But just to step back a little bit, in mid 2018, prior to the announcement of that aforementioned separation, we recognized the need for a strategic assessment in this space. Since our initial implementation, our company, the technology and finance techniques, they had all changed significantly, and we hadn't any in-house experts who could pull all of that together. So we sent out a request for proposal to a number of third-party implementers, and ultimately, we chose Interrel to do the strategic assessment. And I think what differentiated them was that in their response, they committed to help us come to the correct technological decision, regardless of whether it was Oracle or not. We wanted the best answer, not a biased answer. And the output of the Interrel strategic assessment process is really tool agnostic. Then in early 2019, we began some academic evaluations of Oracle EPM, as well as a couple other viable competitors that were identified for us by Gartner. But really, before we could do some POCs or prototypes, that company separation was announced, and it put a pause on all the major initiatives. But that delay was probably a blessing in disguise. While we were taking a year to separate the company, Oracle EPM was catching up to and or surpassing. When we dialed back into this exercise last year, really still didn't have the large manufacturing customer success stories that we really required, as references to make us feel like, we weren't going to be the first ones through the wall. So just this month, we began the ideation phase with Interrel. We are going to work in 2021 to modernize our planning, forecasting, and reporting solutions. And with Interrel's help, build those in the EPM cloud. And then in 2022, leveraging the success that we expect from this year, we're definitely going to consider doing the same with our close and consolidation processes in the cloud.
That is fantastic, and thank you very much for the Interrel plug. We do try to put a very concerted effort when we conduct the strategic assessments to be technology agnostic. So thank you for that shout out. All right, my next question is for Kristen. what are some things you wish you had known before starting your EPM cloud implementation?
When I look back on kind of our journey from going to the cloud, one of the couple things that we think, maybe would have done differently or thought twice about was the time, just allow for that extra cushion of time. I don't think there were any like hindrances that came up. I think we just discovered extras that we wanted to do along the way that maybe just expanded our scope a little bit more. So I would just always build in the cushion for that implementation and to over communicate to all the users the change management aspect of it, because I think that was, no matter how much we communicated, when we did go live, everybody was shocked that they had to rebuild reports or adjust to our new cloud system. So that was just a couple lessons learned. And then I think keeping in mind like our big picture, some of the things that we wish we would have maybe taken a step back on is ask for some more business unit input. It was very corporate driven as a project, but if we would have looked forward a little bit more, we would have maybe had more involvement from all of our business unit leads to make sure that they had some input on the initial design, so that if they wanted to expand the use of the system more, that it would be set up for them that way right away, instead of maybe some more modifications long term.
No, yeah, that is such a great point. And change management is such a huge, huge, huge component of user adoption and business unit adoption. And then the more input, the more collective input everybody has on the front end, the easier it is, I think, to actually go through the implementation process and ultimately the adoption process, which is what, we're really looking for. So those are really good insights. And I've got one final question for Paul. What advice would you give other clients who are thinking about moving to Oracle EPM Cloud?
Okay. Yeah, so I think cloud solutions seem to be inevitable for some business needs in most enterprises, especially bigger enterprises. The vendors seem to have shifted nearly all their development to that environment. Internal IAT organizations are shrinking. And I think they'll focus on custom development, or focus their custom development on business and manufacturing processes that are really specific to your company. Everybody's got unique equipment and something unique about that company that your internal resources will focus on. There's not a package for those types of applications, but business applications that are common, everything from Office to email to Hyperion tools, they're all moving to the cloud.
Yeah, you're right. That's right. So now I want to open it up to everybody in the audience for any questions you have of our panelists. As a reminder, you can submit them through the chat box feature at the bottom of your screen. And then I think we're going to have a little bit of time left, and Taylor is going to walk us through some additional insights that John Bender from Eaton had about how they responded to the current climate. So any questions, enter them in the chat box at the bottom. All right, we'll give it a couple more minutes. We didn't have many questions in the last session either. I think everybody's just really busy right now. All right, well, Taylor, I'll turn it over to you to kind of walk us through the Eaton insights, and then we'll leave the question and answer session open and we can address anything at the end.
Perfect. And yeah, so John Bender was kind enough to, and let me share my screen, from Eaton. He's the senior manager of financial systems. He was just kind enough to give us some insight into a few questions since he couldn't make it. And so if anybody has a question for him that you'd like me to follow up with, I'm happy to do that if you let me know. So anyways, the questions are just kind of around how Eaton responded to the pandemic while also moving to EPM Cloud. So one of the first questions John gave us some insight on is, so in light of the current climate, what are some of the major priorities for John's group? One of those was managing costs, which I think everyone can echo. So eliminating, kind of reducing travel, continuing with, pre-COVID transactions. So, business that they had kind of done before COVID, just making sure that was kind of, those transactions were going through seamlessly, delivering financials under their first year using FCC or FCCS. And then they're also moving to EPBCS, so developing a pilot site for that in anticipation of the overall rollout for the whole company. And then kind of subsequently what was being sacrificed or put on hold. He said, other than travel and kind of pushing out some projects, business as usual. They're going to also continue on working to identify new targets for acquisitions. And that was that one. And then we talked a little bit about change management already, but John also kind of added some input here around how they handle change management when they were moving to EPM Cloud. And so, he mentioned that they have or had a dedicated project and project lead responsible for change management for the FCC implementation. And, that's standard operating procedure for Eaton, just across kind of all large projects, just a dedicated change management team. And then he mentioned a third-party firm that they worked with to work alongside their change management team, and as well as an existing, they have some existing products in the cloud, and there's a playbook that they have when they are kind of introducing new cloud products and establishing controls around those in their environment. So I don't know if I can answer any questions on behalf of John, but I am happy to follow up if anybody has any questions related to their implementation or anything else. So.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Taylor. Okay, well, we're at the end of our panel's discussion. Does anybody in the audience have any questions for our panelists before we close out? Okay, it doesn't look like it. So I just want to thank all of our panelists for sharing your insights, and a special thank you to our participants for taking time out of your busy day to join us. Oh, looks like we do have a question from Terrence Walker. This is for Antonella. What has been the biggest cultural hurdle for your team since transitioning to EPM Cloud?
I knew Terrence would ask a question. Wow, there's been a lot of cultural hurdles. So Knoll has historically been, the way our growth structure, it's been growth through acquisition. So we have a lot of different business units, international and domestic, and each business unit unfortunately has their own ERP system. So while Knoll Corporate, we are transitioning to Oracle, so we're doing an implementation, a stepped phase, and we're almost done. Every other business unit has their own ERP system, and they're very protective of their results, and they're very protective of their systems. So when we started implementing Oracle FCC, the first thing we were doing was trying to get more detail and more access into their system, because we have a quick turnaround. We close our books in 3 days. Fourth day, we're rolling up reports. By morning of day 5, we're issuing reports to our CEO. So especially with our European subsidiaries, they're always submitting results to us morning of day 4. So by the time we turn around and ask them a question, to them, it's day 4 nighttime. And the next morning, we already have to issue out reports. So it's hard to get a response. So the biggest thing we tried to do is get more access and insight into their system so we could do some drill down and or do some research on our own. Well, let's just say they did not like that. They did not want us to have access into their system. They did not want us to, they like to put their message out there the way they want to put it out there, and us getting access and seeing their information allows us to have more insight than sometimes they want us to have. So I think the biggest cultural hurdle was really getting people to be willing to adopt this new system, willing to use it. Like, they didn't want to use it. They're a little bit of everything, changing the way they've done things. We have people that we purchased them. They were like $100 million a year business unit. They were in business for 30 years. They always did something a certain way for 30 years. So now us telling them they have to do build out new reports or report something a different way was very difficult. So really, it really was just dealing with all the different personalities throughout our company.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a great question, Terrence. Any other questions for our panelists? Okay, well, I wanted to once again thank everybody. We will actually be posting the recording of these sessions on our website in the next couple of days. So if you have any colleagues who had hoped that they could attend but had scheduling conflicts, be sure to direct them to interrel.com, and it's under the education/webcast section. All right, thank you everybody so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.